says, get that India. Big boy.
Maika, Sivo! Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell-Gillard!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me for another week of NRL and Parramatta news are my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Boys, so much happening in the NRL. Eels at a bit of an eye of the storm when it comes to big controversies, I suppose, after our 1 point win against the Titans. But we got those 2 points. They can't take them off us. How are you boys feeling as we get ready for a trip to the tropics?
Mate, we did get those 2 points, but you know what? I'm still a bit fired up. I'm not sure how I'm going to be in this podcast. I'm doing all the links so that you and Clint can do hopefully the majority of the talking, but I can't guarantee that I'm not going to jump in and get a little bit troppo about some of the garbage that's been carried on about in the media, the narrative after this Titans game. It's just had me fired up no end, and I'm likely to let loose in this podcast. Clint, you better take over now before I start to lose my cool again.
Well, I'm not too dissimilar. I'm a little bit wound up. I'm like a 120 kilo wrecking ball Junior Barlow, ready to charge up the back fence with some of the I guess talking points that have surrounded our victory. But we'll get a little bit into it later. But in the same token, I'm so incredibly proud that we found a way to win a game when we were down 11-13 at one point. What a tremendous team performance to get that result.
Yeah, we should probably focus more on the positive than some of the garbage negative. But being a Parramatta supporter, sometimes you can't help but be drawn in by the clickbait, be it whatever level of media it is. So count me down as being suckered in this week. John, hit the stinger.
Before we do though, boys, quick shout out to the sponsors of the show, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Actually very excited to be working with Big Swing Golf, Northmead this week, Sixties, for a bit of a corporate function for us to get to put some faces to names there. But yeah, I'll hit the stinger for you now, mate.
News team, assemble!
You know what? It is a really, really huge week of news in the Eels paradise and in the NRL. But let me just start off with echoing that plug. We're going to be down at Big Swing Golf at Northmead this week and looking forward to that and a catch up with a few people. Also, there's a big event down at Paraleagues on Saturday where the continuous call team from 2GB are going to be in Jack's Bar and Grill. That's our normal stomping ground, mate. I hope they've got all the relevant paperwork completed to be in there and taken over where we normally rule the airwaves. But yeah, they're going to be in there. They're in there from 1 till 10. That's a massive stint of being on air, or at least in the premises in Jack's Bar and Grill for 9 hours straight. Our good mate Spiro will, of course, be down there. So I'm going to get down there. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to catch up with Spiro. So if you're looking to catch the Eels, the call of the Eels live down there from 2GB, that will be happening later on Saturday. But I think they've got plenty of prizes and giveaways and all that sort of stuff. And it's always great down there in Jack's Bar and Grill anyway for a feed and a drink and just talking footy. So maybe have that on your agenda this weekend, listeners. And we move on now. And I should also mention this week in our preview podcast, Spiro is going to come back and join us for a special preview that will include a bit of a look at the NRLW. It's good to have Spiro back. His work commitments at 2GB have just made it too difficult for him to be part of the podcast this year, but he said he was always going to be available if we need him for the occasional podcast. We've called on him this week. It works in nicely because he's going to be there at Para Leagues at Jack's Bar and Grill. So have a listen to our preview podcast this week where Spiro makes his return appearance. But on with the Eels news, mate. And let's talk about the suspension of Reg for a start. Pretty hard to argue against a suspension. However, I think there's been some over-the-top comments since then. John, what's your thoughts on the suspension and the reaction?
I was willing to cop a 1 or 2 week suspension for Reg, given that it was a pretty look universally across the board. You've seen the Eels from Brad Arthur to Bryce Cartwright to Guffer and whatnot saying that he's got no malice in him. That was just clearly an act of sloppiness in the heat of the moment, from a guy backing up from a big State of Origin game. And BA went so far as to suggest in his presser that maybe it was also on him because Reg was slated to get substituted out in the next set or two, and maybe Brad had gotten it wrong by just the case of like 1 minute. And that's what led to the fatigue creeping into that play. But I'll tell you what, the over-the-top reaction from the press, talking about he should be rubbed out for 5 or 6 weeks, the over-the-top reaction from the NRL, when, again, I'm going to come back to this, but these two teams had the exact same situation play out last year, and it resulted in a player missing nearly half the season. And there was no penalty, there was no sin bin, there was no charge.
There wasn't even that, and in fact, what we had from the media was a defence of the player who'd committed that foul. Jaden Campbell was defended left, right, and centre. Oh, that wasn't his intent. No, he didn't do the wrong thing. Nothing to see here. That was the narrative all the way through that. What a load of crap that was.
He should have been suspended, just as Reg deserved the suspension.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what really grinds my gears here is that the narrative has been, Jaden Campbell, he didn't do anything wrong, made contact with the arm first, despite caving in the chest of Sean Russell with his knees that he led with. And never mind that initial contact was also a high tackle that was overlooked by the bunker as well at the time.
Well, tell me this, John, right? And I think we know what the answer is going to be. If a tackle is made in a different position, let's say the first contact is with the lower chest and the arm slips up and smashes into the face, is there any defence that says, well, you know what? The first contact was down low, so that's just, that's bad luck. No, it's basically, they'll look at that and they go, you know what? Your tackle ended up making contact with the head and the person gets suspended. I mean, the fact is, anyway, with that Campbell tackle, he slid in on his knees towards the player and he caved the bloke's chest in, caved it in. He had to be transported by ambulance off to hospital, punctured lung, and nothing, no reaction. The main reaction was coming from Eels supporters. That's it. Nothing from the media. Clint, this surely is grinding your gears with it as well.
Oh, big time. And using the example that you just touched on, they absolutely glossed over it after that round 1 game last year. And, as you said, Sean Russell missed half the season. It kind of beggars belief, but then in the same breath, it doesn't. We're talking about, and quite kindly, a video. I'm sure many football fans saw of at least the last couple of days of Ben Eichen circulating around social media and talking about how rugby league tabloid journalism has infected rugby league. And there's some of this over the top reactions and hyperbole, I'll probably say at this point, is absolutely done for to bait responses. And the Eels fan base are one of the more engaged fan bases, and we're certainly one of the more well supported fan bases. And if you need to generate clicks, Parramatta is always a good place to start. So I'm not revealing anything brand new in saying that, but all that said and considered, at the same time, we shouldn't just sit down and take it. And I think we do need to bring attention to the fact that there is just inequity in a lot of these situations, and that's what's the bane of every football fan existence is that there is just complete inconsistency and complete inconsistency in application of not just what we collectively believe to be the rules, but it seems to be a moving target. And no wonder people get, for lack of a better word, the shits, because they can't actually piece together or understand how any official or whether it be the bunker, whether it be the match review committee, get to their findings, get to their outcomes, because they just do not make sense. It would be really nice if the dots could be connected so that everyone can get on the same page. But the conspiracy theorist in me believes that there's a reason that they don't do that, and it's largely because they don't want their decisions to be called into question.
Yeah, I had to write on that topic of what's happening in the way of how discipline is being treated with regard to the Eels this year in the Spotlight post that went up yesterday. But, John, just coming back to the NRL media and how it's reacting, the thing is, for us as supporters, when RCG was suspended for 4 weeks, our take was basically, okay, that's maybe a little bit at the high end, but you know what? He did it. It's 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. His knees have made contact with the back of the Titans player. It was sloppy. It was awkward. All of that sort of thing. But yeah, okay, 4 weeks. And yet the narrative is, look, should have been sent off. Should have been far longer than 4 weeks. Blah 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 blah. Right. And as I said, yeah, they've got their target market in getting reaction out of Eels supporters. But when is enough from this? I think we're pretty fair income in how we respond to foul play, and that we can acknowledge when the Eels are doing the wrong thing. And in fact, I've pointed out where the Eels have more weeks missing out of action from their players due to suspension than any other club. So there is definitely something that has to be looked at in the way of just tidying things up. Fellas, whether it be on field or off field, just tidy things up a bit, because 21 weeks is just, it's absurd. It is so far above every other club. I think the Panthers sit down there with no suspensions. Well, they do have one, which was May's carryover suspension to the start of this year. That was the only one that they're currently facing for the year. Apart from that, there's no suspensions. And as I said, the Eels sitting there with 21 weeks. But talking about this, I want you to jump in here now, John. Sivo fighting the charge. Can you believe that he's fighting the charge?
Well, if you had to pick between the two incidents as to what the Eels might be contesting, given that we just spoke about the Jaden Campbell incident getting no charge, let alone a penalty, you would have thought that would have been RCG would be going to the judiciary to contest a downgrade and not get off, but lower the actual penalty or outcome. But yeah, I was very surprised when I saw the Eels are contesting the Maika Sivo grading. And you got to think, given our reticence in the past to go to the judiciary, that they must feel that they have some case. And I could only think that maybe they're going to argue mechanically. If you go back and watch that replay, Maika didn't have his arm wasn't really raised. It came in sort of below shoulder height, and just the mechanics of the tackle took it into the jaw. And maybe that'll warrant putting it down to a grade 1, which I think with the early guilty plea allows them to play against the North Queensland Cowboys this week. So they've clearly got something that they think mechanically they can argue for the downgrading, because, yeah, on paper, like I said, between the two incidents, I would have thought that it would have been, if any was being contested, it would have been Regis.
To be honest, I've looked at that and I thought, you know what, he'll just take the 3 weeks, right? That's just a good outcome for him in this instance. And you're right, when you look at our past record, there's been so many instances where I've either thought, look, the evidence is there to challenge this, or why don't we challenge this? That's a tough call. In this instance, I'm scratching my head. I'm just looking at it and I'm going, no, it's just gone horribly wrong. it's a suspension. Clint, did you see anything in that he's likely to be able to get off on the with the downgrade?
I was equally as shocked when I saw that we were going to challenge it, and like John said, of the two, I would have thought Reg would be the one that we do if we were to go down that path. But personally, if the decision was in my hands, I would have just accepted the suspensions of both and moved on. And we've got to try and plan for the next few weeks without these guys. But yeah, I think even at the ground, once the shot happened, he was called out by the referee. We went, okay, there was the here we go moan from the crowd, knowing that he was going to be sin bin. And I think we all just accepted at that point, given that he's had a few priors this season, that he'd be gone. So I will be very shocked if he gets off. At the time of this recording, Maika's still yet to have his hearing, and he may well do so as we record this evening. So. I'll be very surprised if he lines up on the field at Queensland Country Bank Stadium on Saturday night.
Maika's got a great feel for that jam on the blind side from the winger getting that spread, but man, he's got to get that initial target point down.
It needs to be like a golfer's swing. He just needs to be a degree or two lower.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Different outcome.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, there is one angle of that tackle where it looks like maybe he didn't actually make contact with the head, that the neck was jarring with the explosive contact to the shoulder. The other angle then looks like, no, he's made contact with the head. But I'm just wondering whether they feel that the true angle is the one that shows no contact with the head. That's the only possible thing that I can think that it is, because you mentioned the angle of the tackle and the arm movement, John, but I look at that and I go, yeah, but if you've made contact with the head, it doesn't matter.
But remember, they're not arguing to get off. They're arguing for a downgrade from grade 2 to grade 1. That's the important distinction here, is that they feel that mechanically they can have justifiable grounds to argue the downgrade. So I don't know if they do, but that's what they seem to be contesting. And ever since, going back to, was it 2013, 2014, Junior Barlaw and Matt Bowen, we've been so gun-shy of going to the judiciary because Junior got done for, I think it was a 4 to 5 week charge initially, and it got bumped up to 9 games or something like that.
Was that even 2013?
Was it 2013? It might have been 2013.
I've got a feeling
with Junior?
Junior and Bowen, yeah. And
that was round 1, 2015.
2015?
2015.
There you go.
Yeah.
So,
oh, geez.
And he ended up getting rubbed out for 8 or 9 weeks after failing to contest the charge. And, yeah, we've been gun-shy of going to the judiciary ever since.
Yeah, well, mate, we normally reserve this stinger for our instant reaction podcasts, but I really want you to lay it on me now.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
Fellas, how is it that from basically full-time onwards, in a game in which the Eels were down to 11 players at one stage, that the media narrative has been all about how the Titans were robbed in this game? It's been like the huge focus on the Eels being offside in the Titans' field goal attempts, completely ignoring the fact that they had big double markers on the Eels when the Eels were going for the 1 pointer themselves. It's ignored a whole, I was going to say something that was perhaps, no, I'm going to say it, a shitload, a shitload of instances through the game that were called incorrectly. John, I think you've got a few instances yourself that you've seen. How does this happen? How is it? Is it, again, like we were talking about with the suspension and the focus on the suspension, that they know they're going to get a rise out of Eels supporters? I get that the Titans were robbed the previous week when, or I shouldn't say robbed, but they copped the call when no referee ever makes the call on an offside with the penalty, with the field goal attempt. I get that. I understand that. But there was so much more to talk about out of this game, especially how a team can battle back from being down to 11 players at one stage to engineer a win. Talk to me.
Well, I understand. Again, we spoke about this, I think, in the wake of the game, that Titan fans will no doubt feel aggrieved that some of the calls that didn't go their way. But like you said, friend of mine, Hamish, one of two Hamishes, but can compose a dossier of going through all the calls, right or wrong, for both teams, and sort of summing it up and going through. And a number of Titans tries coming off forward passes or forward passes in the lead up. There was a forward pass from a kickoff that was painfully obvious that was missed by the officials, Aaron Shop, to one of his middles. Mitchell Moses was taken out in the air at one point for an easy 2-point shot at goal in the second half. There was a litany of bad calls on both sides, and I still contend that Philip Sami made a double movement. I mean, Momentum got the tip of his body over the line, but he clearly promotes the ball, and the rules state you cannot promote the ball even with momentum. So there were a whole string of bad calls there. I mean, Tino Fa'asuamaleaui gets put on report for a shoulder charge. He gets 3 weeks from the judiciary. Maika Sivo got 3 weeks. He got a sin bin. Where's the sin bin for Tino Fa'asuamaleaui? So just...
What about the Jaden Campbell hold down on the Eels line break?
Yes, big Sean Lehner wasn't it? Made a line break. Pretty obvious professional foul at that point. That is 99% in the sin bin, but for whatever reason, not in this game. So, yeah, like I said...
Was there a 6 again call? Was that simply... Did he simply go
6 again, yeah.
So he acknowledged there was an infringement.
He picked up. Yes. Acknowledges the infringement, right? The deliberate slowing up. Bang, here you go, 6 again. But the fact is, it's on the line break. So that's the obvious call.
Well, you look up definition of professional foul. Exactly. So here's stop the attacking team from gaining advantage from a line break or potential try scoring situation, which
Give
is
6 again on the first tackle.
Yeah. So
that's our advantage.
Yep. So look, and I'm sure from a Titans perspective, if they look back at this game, they're going to point out a number of calls that went against them. And that's the reality of the NRL right now, is the officiating levels are not up to scratch. And we've spoken about this at length, boys. This has been a recurring topic. You don't like to dig into officials, but geez, the standards are slipping in this game. But in this case, what is so frustrating is that there has been a clearly biased narrative coming out of this game about woe is the Gold Coast, how unfair it is for them. And yes, it sucks that they got done last week, 2 weeks ago, against Redcliffe or the Dolphins with that penalty call in Golden Point. But the reality is, yes, the Eels were offside in the Tanner Boyd field goal attempt, but so too were the Titans when Mitchell Moses slaughtered it. So Mitch was... you can argue about the mechanics of what is advantage there, but I would argue that even on the successful field goal attempt, the referee should have given the Eels the opportunity to declare whether they wanted to take a 2-point shot at goal from directly in front, mind you, instead of the field goal. So, yeah, both teams copped some bad calls, but it was both ways, not just one way, as the media would have you believe.
Yeah, and it does make it interesting because I'm not quite sure how that would fit in with the rules. That I don't even know if it would have been possible for the referee to call that way, but there would have to be something intrinsically wrong with the rules that says you can face the same offence, and if you are still successful with your field goal, you get 1 point. If you're unsuccessful with your field goal, you're going to get 2 points. Now that sounds like there's something intrinsically wrong in the rules as they are, and that's probably something well worth having a discussion about, or at least putting to the NRL in the way of rule changes. And you don't want to see a lot of rule changes, but that sounds like a horrible anomaly that could result in, as I said, failure getting you more points than success against an infringement. So success against an infringement is not rewarded. Failure against the infringement greatly rewarded. So it just that would just seem to be completely wrong. Clint, your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, well, just to add to that point, yeah, you're incentivizing players to miss and to play for the penalty, and there's a little bit of a gamble in that in trying to read whether the referee has the intention of doing so. Obviously, if you're out there on the field, you're listening out for a call. But yeah, to To add to some of John's comments as well, the Titans all night were pushing the boundaries of the 10 meters. There was a lot of 10-meter offside calls not called. It was, and the ref was keeping an honest 10, but just not enforcing it regularly. And it's a bugbear of mine, and I think it was a bugbear of the crowds on the night as well, because that's sort of what begun the underlying tension that existed within the game, and it sort of started to spill over into other little moments throughout. But again, like I said earlier, you just want to see consistency in the enforcement of whatever the interpretation is. That's where fans' frustration comes from, and I think there's a little bit of tall poppy syndrome going on, and woe is me from the Titans. That's carried over from the week previous. They felt as though that they were dudded, and now they've gone, oh well, it was called against us last week, but not called for us this week. But the thing that irritates me in those types of discussions, and then the subsequent whataboutism that follows those moments, is the Titans had 79 minutes to win the game previous, and they had a point in time which they were playing against 11 men. If you weren't good enough to get the job done, then it's unfortunate that moment went against them. But it's not as though they didn't have all these other moments 79 minutes prior to that miss, or 77 minutes prior to that miss, whenever the attempt took place to win the game. They had their opportunities, and they weren't able to put themselves in that position. So that's what frustrates me ultimately.
And you know what, Clint? To that end, the media narrative, which has shown over and over and over again that the Eels went early on the field goal attempt. And the thing is, there was nothing extraordinary about what happened with the Eels compared to a lot of other clubs that when there's a field goal on. In fact, it was basically, as I said, that the Eels went a little bit early on that. And then the Tanner Boyd with his attempt, he took almost an eternity with the take that he had. But I guess the tough part for the Titans is that they got pulled up last week for something that every other club does, and you will see it in virtually every field goal attempt.
But importantly, also that they weren't put up on it last week against the Eels.
Yeah.
So they'll put up against the Dolphins, but they got away for it against Parramatta. Just Mitchell Moses was good enough to get the kick away.
Correct. So basically what I'm saying is there was nothing extraordinary in what happened with Parramatta's defensive line in that. Nothing at all. They could have shown any film clip of a field goal attempt in the dying minutes of a game or in extra time from any game this year, and you're going to see the exact same thing happening. But, of course, the thing was this week, it was against the team who had the unfortunate scenario of Grant Atkins calling. It was Atkins, wasn't it, last week, that called them on that offside. And unfortunately for them as well, he was calling out their particular player for being in front of the line, like before the ball was even played. And telling him offside and
Atkins'
yelling
credit,
out at him a second time.
To his credit, he was hyper vigilant on that particular instance. It wasn't like it was a late call into a penalty. He was on that guy from the start.
Yeah. So that was a completely different scenario. But I get that there was nothing different happening for them as there is in literally every other game. And
I just want to add as well, gents, to do a little bit of a 180 on what I was saying before about whataboutism. You'll both clearly remember the qualifying final in week 1 of the semis of 2017, when half the Melbourne side was offside at a 16-all scoreline and the game in the balance. Sorry, it might have been 18-16 at that point. I'm sorry, and we had the chance to equal to go into Golden Point in that game. I bring up that example because it happens to all teams and all clubs at some point.
Yep. And you know what? And again, I'll come back to it. In that particular finals match, and we're talking about a finals match, there was not one scrap of media attention on how offside the Melbourne team were in that particular play, in that key play, basically the last possession that the Eels had in the game. And you saw literally their entire team well off the line when the ball hadn't even cleared the ruck. And, it was what it was. And now there's all this furor. And again, I think it comes back to a little bit to the scenario that there was one team copping it one week and then missing out the next. But also, there seems to be a certain amount of enjoyment if they can point it out in an Eels game. I know that's maybe there's a little bit of victim mentality or fears about bias or what have you. But if we're talking about just facts and stats, just onto officiating, it was this actually had got past me for a large part of the season, where I was happy about the Eels' discipline because we're ranking up near the top of the NRL for penalties conceded. And I know how important it is to the Eels. I've listened to BA talk to players about it at training. I heard him with being so direct with the young players that were part of the Eels pre-season. So that young group of Jersey Flegg and SG ball players. And when they were doing a little bit of like actual football drills, and he went into them about their discipline with holding the line and those sorts of things, and said that the Eels take pride in being a highly disciplined team, and if they can't be disciplined, basically there isn't a place for them. That it was something that they had to make sure that they handled well. And we see it on a weekly basis where the Eels give away fast play the balls to their opposition to minimise the likelihood of penalties or six agains. And they record, it's fact, they record a slower time speed than their opposition on literally a weekly basis. There's only been one game this year when the opposition had a marginally slow play the ball than the Eels. The Eels are often between half a second and a full second slower than the opposition. Now, that is significant. When averaged out across an entire game, that is significant. And my contention is that when this happens with the Eels, when they are so clean around the ruck, that when they vary slightly from it, like when they are as slow as their opposition, they'll get pinged because it looks like it's a big change from what they're doing. It looks like they're holding down. And at the same time, when it's clean, they seem to also regard that the game itself is clean, and the opposition slowing the Eels up and wrestling. And we've seen many instances of that this year, of the opposition slowing down the ruck against the Eels. It's just not called. You don't get six agains. You don't get penalties. It just doesn't happen. And the Eels are now, and this is the point that I wanted to lead to, it's in the post that I've written, we receive the fewest penalties of any team in the NRL. We rank 17th. We average receiving 4.4 penalties a game. 4.4 as an average. Like, that's astounding. I mean, it's literally saying that the opposing teams just don't commit indiscretions. I know that there's indiscretions that are covered by six agains and 10 metres, but 4.4 penalties per game, fellas. That's astounding. I mean, to be the fourth best team in the comp for penalties conceded, but the worst for penalties received. It beggars disbelief as far as I'm concerned. So maybe I've fully explored this, and maybe my rant has been good enough to cover for all of us without the listeners having to hear us going on and on and on.
It is worth adding, though, the average generally sits around about, 6-7 penalties per game per side. If we're looking at somewhere between like a 12 to 18 penalties per game, depending on the flow of the game, in any given NRL match. So to be at 4.4 is significantly below that, and Yeah, it's amazing how these teams all seem to be magically well disciplined against us to negate the opportunity for us to receive penalties. It's just I think it's a great bit of evidence-based detective work that you've done, Sixties. I know in discussions that three of us have had at different points. It certainly supports our sniff test, eye test feel for the game that's the case. And now that we've had over 20 rounds of the competition, the data supports that. So I think it's something worth pursuing and pushing the button on, because penalties as we get towards the back end of this year and are incredibly crucial in just matches and potentially determining final spots as close as this season has been. So, and given that we're in the middle of the dogfight for that at the moment, it's something that should be spoken about. But, instead we're in the news for not being penalized when we should, when the long-term data says, actually, we don't get anything by comparison.
Yeah. That's literally the comeback that should be with regard to Parramatta not being penalised for something. Hey, have a look at the penalties that Parramatta receive on a weekly basis. It's pretty damn awful. Fellas, let's move on. I hate to do it, but speaking of things that are upsetting, news is just filtering through via Adrian Prashenko of the Sydney Morning Herald that it's been confirmed that Ethan Sanders, the rising half in the Eels ranks, has inked a deal with the Canberra Raiders to commence a 2-year deal there starting in 2025. We were just speaking quickly about it then and suggesting that who knows, it may well be that they might try to negotiate an early release for him because he's still contracted to the Eels next year. There'd been permission sought for him to sort out his future before next year, which the Eels allowed for a testing of the market and for contract offers to come through. It's turned out that the Raiders is a more attractive location for Ethan to ply his trade moving forward. So there's going to be a lot of Eels supporters unhappy about that. I know we've got young halves or relatively young halves and well-established halves in the NRL, but after releasing Jake Arthur, the next player coming through was going to be Ethan Sanders. He starred in the New South Wales under-19s. I don't know what more to say at this point, fellas. It is highly disappointing, John.
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was going to be a tough sell to sit behind Mitchell Moses and Dylan Brown at the Eels. When you're a rising young playmaker, you always want to back yourself to be in the NRL, in your early 20s. And at Parramatta, there was the stark reality for him that if everything was good for Parramatta, then he wouldn't be required. I don't blame him for going elsewhere. It is interesting that it's only a 2-year deal. That would suggest, like, not just in terms of for the Eels and whatnot, but just suggests that it also means he's keeping his options open for opportunities elsewhere too. And also can sort of, renegotiate with Canberra after the first year if he goes well. So, look, Ethan is an outstanding young halves prospect. He has an NRL caliber kicking game right now, which is a real rarity in young halves. That's often the thing they've got to work on, aside from their defense, the most coming into senior football. But I think he can, strictly speaking, you could put him into the Parramatta system next week against the Cowboys, and he could, in terms of kicking, handle those responsibilities with aplomb. Big game for the Canberra Raiders. They'll be, I don't know about rushing him in the first grade, boys, but with Jack Whiten departing, there's obviously an opportunity in the halves to work alongside Jamal Fogarty or maybe replace Jamal Fogarty in the long term. So best of luck to Ethan, except when he's playing Parramatta.
Yeah, Clint?
Look, it's absolutely a shame from our perspective, but as John so eloquently put, you can't really blame him for seeking that opportunity. He would have seen that his pathway to first grade is blocked by some pretty good players here at Parramatta. It's just a shame that we have. He's probably the best half that we've internally developed from the beginning of his development through to his senior football in quite some time, and I'm putting just a little asterisk next to Mitch Moses' name there because of the time he spent at the Tigers. But we can only wish him the best. He's obviously been very successful in the lower grades for us. As part of the SG ball winning team earlier this year. He certainly would have made his name more well known last week through a very strong performance for New South Wales in the under-19s Origins, and it's just a reality of that you can't keep them all. And you gents did a podcast interview with Nathan Brown earlier this year, and he said just as much. So. Again, we can only wish him the best, apart from when he plays Parramatta. But it does sting a little bit, but it's understandable how something like this can happen.
Yeah, I think probably the only way you would have been able to keep Ethan would have been if they had have locked him into a development contract a bit earlier, because he's not on a development contract at the Eels. He was contracted for next year, but not on that type of contract. Maybe that might be a lesson going forward. I'm not sure. But, very, very disappointing. I guess because we know that when it came to the depth chart, he was going to be next up there. Now, whether this causes a rethink in the halves progression because you've now got Josh Lynn, who has been playing a mixture of 5'8" and halfback. He plays 5'8" when Ethan Sanders is there in the halves, but when Ethan's been out, Josh has slipped into the halves. You've also had Blaze Talangi, who I noted, and we're going to be talking about this momentarily in the Eels team list news, has been playing in the centres because of the halves combination of Ethan Sanders and Josh Lynn. And this week with Josh Lynn is out of the team, and you've got Blaze making his return match, being named at 5'8" rather than in the centres for Jersey Flegg. So I don't know whether it's going to cause a bit of a rethink, but I had to think that next year in New South Wales Cup that they were going to be looking at a halves pairing of Sanders and Lynn in the halves.
Yeah.
And it just would have seemed like a very natural progression. There may well have also been the likelihood that Matty Arthur Woods might have followed up so that you've got that progression of the spine from the SG ball progressing into Jersey Flegg this year, progressing into New South Wales Cup, if not at the start of next year, then certainly at some stage next year, so that you've got, that those combinations that know each other well. So anyway, it's I guess there's a bit of a rethink now for the Eels as far as their future planning is concerned, because without question, they need to be thinking, what is the backup plan? Because we know that this year, with Jake Arthur moving on in the halves, it's they're basically looking at Dejan Arce, and that's it, to cover both half and 5'8". So anyway, fellas, we now let's first of all give a mention before we get to Eels team list news that supporters should be getting out to CommBank Stadium this Sunday, because at midday we have the Eels NRLW playing their first game of the season against newcomers, the West Tigers, and it's almost a bit like little brother, isn't it? Because we've got all these players that are linked with the Eels in the past, and they're running around now for the West Tigers. I know that they've had their own separate links to the West Tigers, don't get me wrong, but there's a number of players there for West Tigers who've formerly been Eels. It's the season opener. It's a CommBank Stadium. It's not linked to other Eels games. So I think that's a good sign to get out there, get as many people into the stands supporting the Eels as possible. We had a nice roll-up at just the local park at Eric Tweedale Stadium for their trial match. there was somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 people that was there. I just know it was a full stand. There were people beyond the stands there as well. So it was a good crowd, good atmosphere. But this is CommBank Stadium. We want a few more than that there for the Eels' first NRLW game of the season. John, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there is a big element of big sister, little sister in this game with, I think, 6 of the top 17 West Tigers having repped the Eels in the NRLW. Highest profile there, Botil Walsh, the superstar fullback. And she'll be...
Hang on. Did I say big little brother before?
Yes.
Oh.
So I suppose a faux pas in the NRLW space, but that's a rugby league sort of truism that you get so used to, given that it's been mostly a male space for so long. But now we're getting incredible female football, obviously. So, but yeah, I mean, Botil Walsh, she had the one season with the Eels back in our inception year, was electric at fullback for us, but unfortunately did her ACL late in the season. But she'll be their real star player, and they've recruited pretty well. I think Kezi Apps is in the back row, and they've got the young player that you had a big rap on, Sixties, Lasana Lutu, playing on the interchange. So they've got a good team. Eels do have a little bit of experience in their ranks in terms of people returning to the squad. Abby Church at fullback, obviously Kennedy Charrington, Ruben Charrington, Ruby Jean Kennard Ellis. So we've got some good core players there. Elsie Albert, Rachel Pearson there, alongside Kennedy. I think they're our real triumvirate of cornerstone players in this season and also moving forward. So they're our leaders, whether they've got the C next to their name like Pearson and Kennedy, or in Elsie's case just being the forward leader there in the middle. And yeah, I'm really excited because got some real strike on the flanks. Zawi Faye, Cassie Toei, Hiku, Abby Church from fullback. They're all either Parramatta juniors or returning players for us there. And they've been really good for us in recent seasons. Got some power in the centres, Mahalia Murphy. And then in the forward pack, aside from those core players you mentioned, there's a lot of unknown factors there. So, young women or journeyman women, I suppose, too, in some cases, coming to Parramatta for a chance to write their own story here and be, big-time feature factors in our forwards.
Yeah, Clint, what are you most looking forward to with this opening round?
Really, I guess, making our identity known to the NRLW. I think I've said it before in terms of now that multi-year contracts are in existence, this is the real evolution of the Parramatta NRLW side. And as is the case for all the other NRLW teams. But, I'm given our forward pack and the kicking game of Rachel Pearson, I expect us to play not too dissimilarly to the men's side in terms of keeping the ball nice and tight and down through the middle third, and also kicking for meters and, really controlling that field position. And likewise, given the type of player Dean Witters is or was in his day, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how we use the ball.
Yeah. And look, I think for mine, that kicking game of Rachel Pearson is going to be a telling factor in this. And if we can, and I almost see this as the NRLW Eels team can maybe play a game that's not too different to the men's side with having Mitch Moses as such a dominant factor with his kicking game. I think Rachel Pearson can be that for the Eels in the NRLW team, and a strong forward pack. They can get the job done in terms of taking full advantage of deeper kicks into the opposition half and being able to maybe keep the opponents trapped within their 40 metres and making it just harder for them to attack. And winning the middle, playing and then getting to the edges after winning the middle. I mean, it's just classic football, but you really need to have someone who's got a very good kicking game to set the platform for that. And I think that's what the Eels have secured this year with Rachel. Don't forget as well that as far as TCT is concerned, we are the place that you can come to get your Eels NRLW content. We've got our latest addition to the TCT content creators, Kai Ferreira. Kai will be producing his first preview post this week, which should go out either Friday or Saturday morning this week on the Eels NRLW clash with the Tigers. We have a special dedicated podcast with Mary Kay that will go out this week as we look at the season ahead and what her expectations are. And we talk about the women's game in general with Mary. Mary is a great friend of TCT, and it's always a pleasure to have her on the podcast. So keep an eye out for that. And after such a massive amount of Eels news, we are finally at the Team List Tuesday part of the podcast. John, talk us through the main talking points of the Eels' 3 grades of selections.
Well, it's 4 grades now, 60s. Flag, Cup,
sorry,
NRLW
yes.
and NRL. So we got the quadrella going on right now. So plenty of Parramatta football for those that are hungry to get their fix. We'll start with the NRLW, continuing with them 60s as the headline feature this week. You mentioned the standalone Sunday kickoff, 12 o'clock p.m. out at CommBank Stadium. So we run through their backline. Abby Church, who has played centre and wing for the Eels, she gets her chance at fullback this year. She'll be wearing the number 1 in round 1. Zawi Faye, Cassie Toi Hiku, couple of young speedsters. Zawi Faye for wonderful in and away in her toolkit. Cassie's a real rugged runner for plenty of paces we saw in that trial against the Dragons. 2 new centres, Mahalia Murphy and Chantel Stowers. In the halves, we already mentioned Rachel Pearson. She's one of those free cornerstone players for the Eels. She'll be partnering Pahuka Berryman Duff. So a new face there at 5'8" for the Eels for fans to track. In the front row, Elsie Albert, Ruben Cherrington, dummy half, and Ruby Jean Kennard Ellis. Parramatta's first ever development pathways player to make it through to the NRLW, so good to see her coming back around. In the back row, a couple of new faces, Amelia Murphy and Talisha Quinn. Kennedy Cherrington, the Energizer Bunny at lock forward. On the interchange, Capri Pacau. She'll be rotating as a battery with Ruben Cherrington, dummy half. You've got Jade Vanua, Shannon Muru, and Madeline Jones. Extended roster, Monique Donovan, Kyra Simon, Kimberly Hunt, Rosemary Beckett, and Nakia Davis Walsh. And like we said of those Tigers, you got Botil Vetti Walsh, Rakia Horn, Emily Curtin, Christian Pio, and Najvada George. And I do wonder, 60s, there's a Josie Lenars on the wing. Any relation maybe to Nick in our Jersey Flag team?
Interesting. We might have to post the question to Nick, see if we can get a bit of feedback on that before the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a strong lineup based on what we saw in the trial with their victory over the Dragons. A lot of those girls were in that starting team, so it's not necessarily a surprise that this is the team that was named. I think it's obviously the side that Dean Witters had in mind. We did see a few positional changes as it went through because the game was played in thirds, and we saw a few changes. We won't dive too deep into things now because we are going to be doing that, first of all, the dedicated NRLW podcast, and we also have the preview podcast coming up. So, Clint, anything you'd like to add at this stage, just based on the team list?
Well, I think it'll be an entertaining round 1 game, and that narrative of the sub story of the former Eels players that exist in that Tigers side probably only adds a little bit of fuel of fire to the what feels like a little bit of a one-sided Western Sydney rivalry that exists. I meet plenty of Tigers fans across the years who seem to not be too fond of us, whereas I'm very much indifferent. But it'll be interesting to sort of see how that transpires in the NRLW space. But like I said before, I'm just really looking forward to us establishing our identity and the NRLW side. This is our NRLW side now, at least for the next couple of years. So, it's always exciting when a season kicks off. They're full of hope, and despite some of the players that have moved on, they'll still have aspirations of going one better than what they did last year, and certainly establishing a lot more consistency throughout the season regular.
Now, John, as far as the men's competitions are concerned, we've got the NRL, the New South Wales Cup, and Jersey Flag all back in action this week after the Jersey Flag had a bye last week. Really, the main changes we're talking about are the ones that have been caused by first of all, the suspension of Reg and the potential suspension of Sivo. Are there any clues in the team selections in first grade in the extended list? And then likewise, what's the flow-on effect as these changes cascade down through the grades?
Yes, sir. So, look, Eels pretty much as per program outside of that. We'll call it the 1.5 suspensions right now, given that Maika is fighting or arguing for a downgrade as we record this podcast at the judiciary. So he has been named. In the extended roster, though, the only two that would really come into consideration as a replacement, I would argue, would be Hayes Dunster at 18th man and Wanga Blake at 20th. I suppose the other wild card for consideration is that BA could slot a back rower into the centres and move Bowie Simonson to the wing. And we always talk about, weakening strength and weakness and the implications of that. But if he does have 17 first graders, he would prefer to play on a consistency basis over perhaps putting in some underdone backs maybe. Hayes, we know, is the poor guy is battling both knee and other injuries right now. And Wanga hasn't been in the best of contention since coming back from multiple shoulder or collarbone injuries. So that would also be up for consideration. But beyond that, 60s, Eels, as per program, Offie Ogden comes in to replace Reagan, Campbell-Gillard in the starting team. But otherwise, the same roster that took on the Gold Coast Titans with the Eels not gaining any additional injuries since last week.
Okay, and that flows down into New South Wales Cup. There's actually some movement between New South Wales Cup and Jersey Flegg as well. What's the main movements that are there?
So again, a strong injection of youth into our New South Wales Cup team as they not necessarily battle for results now, but battle for development progress. So into the starting team comes the Jersey Flegg captain, Jock Brazel, who's enjoyed a very strong season individually. He's joined by fellow Flegg-eligible players Jonte Junior-Befamiza, Jacob Davis, and Brock Parker. Those boys will play this game from the interchange bench. Aside from that, Dan Keir moves into the starting team at lock forward. Kai Rodwell starts at prop forward after missing last week with the promotion now of Offie Ogden to the NRL. In the back line, no changes provisionally. Dunster and Blake have been named to play Cup, but obviously, should one of those players be caught up into NRL for that Saturday game against the Cowboys, they're going to need to name a replacement there. I imagine it'll be one of the sort of the Shield boys or Ron Massey boys that they've used in the past, whether it's Mulatalo or Tupou or something like that. But yeah, so in this team, some good young talent. Also, Arthur Miller Stephen, a fullback, should give him a shout out. Another Flegg-eligible player in this team. But yeah, the big movement on the interchange, and then obviously potentially in the back line, depending how that plays out for the NRL game.
And I think we had Matt Dury injured during the New South Wales Cup game last week, yeah. So that it would explain his absence there. And yeah, we've also seen a player or two that's come back from New South Wales Cup to Jersey Flegg, and a few changes there.
Yeah, so one admission from the New South Wales Cup team that is in the Flegg team this week is Tony Mattelli. He's had a long campaign up in senior football this year. So interesting to see. Obviously, we're not going to get that insight as fans, but interesting to see what the motivation will be behind that. Whether it's to galvanise him, whether it's just to give him a chance to almost recharge against a less physical competition. But he'll be starting in the front row in the Jersey Flegg this week. You already mentioned earlier in the podcast, 60s, Blaze Talangi makes his long-awaited return from injury after getting hurt in the City versus Country representative game, if I'm not mistaken, big fella. He got dinged up pretty bad early in that contest and has been out ever since. So good to see Blaze back. He's a very good prospect, can play in the halves, centre, I reckon back row as well. He's very versatile, very strong. We get Arpa Tweedle at fullback, Richard Penasini in the centres. You got obviously Ethan Sanders at halfback, Matty Arthur at dummy half, Charlie Geimer, who had an outstanding game in that New South Wales versus Queensland Origin 19s. He's in the starting back row. Nick Linares has a C next to his name. The electric Ethan Martin. He's been so good in the wing and fullback opportunities he's got in recent weeks, Sixes, that they couldn't leave him out of his strengthened team. He'll be on the interchange, where he's joined by a trio of young bulls in Lance Lima, Saxon Pryke, and Sam Tuavati. And yeah, they're taking on the Roosters at 1:15 p.m. out at Wentworth Park on Sunday.
Yeah, again, pity that we've basically got a clash between that and the NRLW. If you're at Combank Stadium on Sunday,
You're not in the middle of the
watch
city, exactly.
NRLW,
Yeah.
you're not going to be at Wentworth Park, not Wentworthville people.
No, Wentworth Park. Yeah.
Yep. Get on the train to Central.
Yeah. The dogs are going around in between in between kicks for goal. Clint, I just want your quick take. Who for you, if Sivo's unsuccessful, as we are tipping that he will be, who comes in? Just your take.
Personally, I'd go with the experience of Wonga Blake. I know he's been down in form, and he's had a raft of issues with his collarbone this year. But he's also played well north of 150 NRL games. I think it's like 168 odd or so that he's played. He was good enough to be in our grand final squad last year and had a number of good games across the course of last year. And maybe coming back in on the wing might be the thing to help galvanise him a little bit and playing with the NRL boys. I can understand the argument for Hayes as well. Regarded probably as a safer option, certainly when it comes to the high ball and given some of the challenges Wonga had there at the back end of last year. But at the same time, we've seen him running around in cup, and we note that he's coming back from one of the worst possible injuries a rugby league player can have. And throwing him into the Lions' den against some of the top performing teams over the course of the next few weeks might not necessarily be the best thing for his confidence at this particular point. So I are on the side of experience with Wonga Blake.
Yeah, okay. And you know what? I'm probably agreeing with you, and I think I just simply add to that would give Wonga the opportunity, because if Sivo fails, he's out for 4 weeks now, not 3. And that's the big risk of him challenging. If Wonga goes well, he can basically set himself up for a run of 4 games in first grade, and that then puts if he's successful and if he plays well, that gives BA an extra selection option that at the moment on paper doesn't exist, and in reality doesn't exist, because you're talking about no one really being able to show any form in the New South Wales Cup. That's just the way that the team's going. We've got to be blunt. The way that the team's going, it is near impossible to be showing any great form in that grade. And he's got the opportunity to put his hand up and say, look, I'm not a spent force. I'm a genuine option between now and the end of the year. And if he goes well, maybe BA's got food for thought about who he selects on the wing going into finals football. Okay, fellas, it's been quite an in-depth look in the Eels news category, but we have got some NRL news. I'm going to run through a couple of things really quickly that probably doesn't need too much to be spoken about. Nathan Cleary back. Bad news for the Bulldogs. I think there's a hiding coming their way this week. Latrell Mitchell back. South Sydney would be quite pleased about that. It makes that I think they're playing the Broncos this week. Is that correct?
Yes, South versus Brisbane, correct.
That will add a bit of spice to the game there. We've got Matt Moylan dropped from the Sharks team, and Talakai relegated to the bench. Any surprises, really, given the Sharks' defensive issues on their left-hand side?
I'm honestly surprised the Sharks have gotten away with playing Talakai in the centres that long. He's obviously...
To echo that, I was going to say, I'm surprised this trigger wasn't pulled earlier, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's obviously a damaging player with the ball in hand, but that comes with some pretty obvious defensive deficiencies. And, the Sharks have been able to get away with it for a long time, and maybe he'll be of better value to them on the interchange. We can use him a little bit more strategically in the context of the flow of a given game. So, yeah, and given that Trindle's been very good for the Sharks or the Jets in Reggie's for a good period now, I'm not surprised to see them pull the trigger on that move. But, yeah, the Sharks had to do something, didn't they, boys? They've been struggling, and a lot is now starting to be made of their, not just this season, but their long-term record against teams inside the top 8. They beat up on the weaker teams in this competition, haven't been able to match it with their contenders.
Yep. We've also had Big Tino's suspension after that shoulder charge against Reg. 3 weeks for that. We've already touched on that. We probably don't need to go any deeper into that at this stage. We've also had Reece Walsh, the Broncos being able to argue that his game that he missed for Queensland in Origin should count as part of his suspension. So he now returns this week for the Broncos. And again, that makes it a little bit more of a tastier match for that clash that they have with South and Latrell Mitchell being back. Now, Manly, a couple of interesting things happening there for Manly. Lodge being selected, the train and trial contract, and a little bit of talk around today about the NRL re-examining or taking a closer look into the details of what his value will be on the salary cap for the Sea Eagles going forward this year. A must-do, fellas, Clint?
Yeah, absolutely. Although the concept of precedent seems to be lost on the NRL, but we'll park that for a moment. I don't get how the notional value of any player that's earning quite good money as a top 30 contracted player can then suddenly shift to being a train and trial player at a different club in the same season. Something doesn't quite seem right there. So,
what was he on? Like somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 or something.
That seems to be the consensus figure. Yeah, among the media, that seems to be the consensus.
Even if he isn't, we're a bit more conservative and say that he's $500,000. I mean, that's well above the NRL average. So we're not talking about someone who's of average earning capacity. That you could potentially argue, they haven't played first grade in a while, they've shifted clubs. Maybe there's a case there. No, this is someone for a number of years now who's been earning well above the NRL average. To suddenly shift.
He's basically getting, if you round it way down to 500,000, he's getting around $10,000 a week. Yep. And Manly basically saying, well, look, we can get him for the rest of the season for around $1,000 a week.
And using that math, you've wiped off 90% of his value. Hello, that is very problematic, and that is not a loophole that any club should be allowed to exploit. So, I would like to see some clarity on how this came about, and subsequently how it's going to be managed through the rest of the year, as well as for his notional value in the future. A lot of questions around this one.
I think it's something that the NRL probably needs to put in concrete, not just for this year, but for future seasons, because it is just a very, very murky area. And, John, the other thing with Manly is they put out their player agent listing.
It's a bold new approach to keeping your fans informed about roster construction.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Yeah, let's see if it works for them indeed. Obviously Manly were thinking to get on the front foot and be proactive in regards to some of the discourse surrounding their coach, their staff, and some of their recruits in relation to Isaac Moses controlling their list management. And they put out this list to highlight that there was only 5 players currently contracted to Isaac Moses in their top 30. But there's nothing like saying, telling people that you have a problem when you desperately put out, propaganda to say you haven't got a problem, right? So, and look, obviously there's some nuance to this whole discussion about player managers, not just Isaac Moses, obviously, but player managers being able to control clubs in regards to, you take this player, or I'll give you this player if you take this player, and your coach is with me, so you need to sign this guy and all that sort of stuff. But gosh, Manly handled this poorly. That's just the nicest thing I can say.
You know what? I don't know. I don't know that there's any way that's around it. But I think one of the murkier areas with this is that you've got coaches and support staff, like assistant coaches, that are now managed by these player agents. And I get you're not going to get someone coming into the player agent market and they just look after a player agent or a coach or two, right? It's just that's not going to happen. It's not a specialty market. So I guess if they're going to have an agent, they're going to be someone that's already in the rugby league business who looks after players. So I don't think there's going to be any way of avoiding the fact that there are going to be clubs that have both coaching staff and players managed by the same agent. And it's awful, but it doesn't look great, but I guess if it's done the right way, there's no issues. When you start to get a stench about the place and you know, there must be that perception out there, and certainly people are, I guess they've started suggesting it on social media, whether it be Manly fans or other fans or journos or what have you, to push Manly to put out that list. It's really unprecedented. But I don't want to give Isaac Moses any more airtime here, so let's move on.
Well, more unfortunate breaking news, boys, but this one more to be expected, I suppose. Maika Sivo unsuccessful in his bid to get the charge downgraded. Decision was unanimous. He will miss 4 games.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to call that as I see it. I just didn't understand the logic of challenging that. Yeah,
yeah, it is very. Yeah. Like I said, they must have fought that like on precedent, because you're not allowed to use random footage anymore. They have their case log of catalogued incidents for you to draw upon for material. They must have felt that there was something in the archives that supported a grade 1 charge. But yeah, given unfortunately, Maika has a little bit of a reputation with the judiciary. He's copped a few charges this year, and sort of been able to plea down to fines. But yeah, given his history and the direct contact it looked like, I'm not surprised to see that it was upheld.
I'm hoping that we get some sort of explanation, whether we can chase it up or whether the Eels put it out or not. But, you know, and it doesn't quite fit into the same category as Maddo taking a 3-game suspension rather than a fine. But I just don't understand the logic of going down on a no. It just looked like a no-win situation. It was like literally saying, give me another week. Like that's literally what it feels like. Give me another week, because I didn't see that it was defensible in any way, shape, or form. But we've probably spoken enough about our suspensions already. Let's deflect it to another club to have a giggle about. The Tigers and the appearance of Lee Hadjibantalis on NRL 360 answering questions about what's happening with the club. John, what's your takes on that first, and then I'll come to you, Clint.
Again, like with the Manly list management update, this feels like a bizarre attempt to be on the front foot and you know, to convince their fans that all is right here, when clearly for the West Tigers there is, you know, a lot wrong behind the scenes. And it's not uncommon in rugby league to have disagreements between your recruitment manager and your coach. You know, obviously you want them in lockstep as much as possible, but sometimes they're going to have differing opinions on player evaluations and whatnot. But that's not what we're hearing from the West Tigers. We're hearing like very different ideas about how this club needs to move forwards between Fulton and Marshall, and we're hearing that Sheens is being cut out of meetings, and you know, he is the current head coach. Like, what is going on over there? I mean, there was a whole lot of corporate speak there, Clint, about you know, Tim Sheens' contract to be our coach next year, and he can't guarantee any position on a basis as a board member or as an executive of the club because of the legal implications. So there was a whole lot of legalese in there.
But Clint, the classic that he actually used the rugby league cliche, maybe not in the exact words, but essentially that there was the full support of the board. I think was he talked about.
There was, yes, that Tim has the I don't know if you like to use unequivocal or something like that, or full support, but there was an adaptation of the classic full support of the board, the classic death kiss, yeah.
So I don't know what to make. If you were a West supporter, Clint, if you're a West Tigers supporter, if you were inflicted with that, how would you be feeling right now?
I'm shaking my head as you both say this, gentlemen. Look, I'm gonna quote National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation here and say, just like the Jello of the Month Club, the Tigers are the gift that keeps on giving. You know, every rugby league euphemism in existence seems to have been exhausted within the four walls of the West Tigers organisation, and then spills out into the media, and we hear about it at least every second week, if not more. Yeah, look, it's um, the fact that they just feel the constant need to come out and address things only fuels the fire. You know, what they really need to do is just shut up and not be seen. You know, there should be a pattern of behaviour well established within not just rugby league but any organisation, that the more publicly seen the chairman is, the more poorly run the organisation happens to be. It's a correlation. So, you know, I'm not saying that necessarily is causation in this instance, but you know, and we certainly don't have all the information of what goes on there. But you know, from what's intimated and from what we do see, it seems to suggest that that's the case. What they really need to do is stop talking about what they're going to do. Stop telling everyone, you know, making the even potential business known, and just get on with it and be quiet about it, you know. And you know, I call it embracing the suck, and I think we spoke about this a number of times over the course of this year. Certainly in terms of when we've touched on the Dragons as well, is that you can't fast track yourself to success. You know, you even if you were to buy a couple of quality players, you have to embrace the suck. When we were in this position ourselves as the Parramatta Club, it took a number of years, as well as the OLGR getting involved and then having an administrator appointed to correct the course of the ship, let alone to actually establish some years of continuous success. And it seems as though clubs like the Tigers and others who are in similar positions don't want to embrace the suck and accept their reality. They really just need to walk in and go, you know what? We are where we are, and we've just got to take a step forward each and every day from this point, as opposed to trying to hack their way out of success, or try and talk out of their position, I should say, and try and talk their way into success. No, you just got to do some really ugly but quiet work in the background and chip away at it, and eventually you'll get there.
And
but you know,
I was just going to say,
it just continues.
What is really terrifying for the West Tigers, if I was a fan, is that their brains trust, and obviously they're not in lockstep, but their brains trust are having catastrophic disagreements about players like Jock Madden, Jack Cogger, and Aiden Caesar. We're not talking NRL superstars here. They are burning down this place because of replacement level playmakers. So, yeah, like that is really concerning for mine if I was a West Tigers fan. And it's clear for the West Tigers too that one thing they've got to try and fix at a corporate level and also a football operations level is that they've got some pretty gleeful leakers. The moment anything happens there, it is in the papers within minutes, it feels like. You know, other clubs can put a lid on, you know, disagreements that happen because it's a workplace. People are going to disagree. Like I said, you do want your, you know, everyone in lockstep as much as possible, but things happen. Tempers flare. People have different opinions. That does happen at any workplace. But for the West Tigers, the moment someone, you know, burps, you know, someone's on the phone to the media, you know, oh my God, and, you know, got the latest scoop for you. So, yeah, for them, it just gets played out in the press, and it's got to be fatiguing as a Tigers fan, like we know, boys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because one of the lines that was said by Hadj Pantelis on 360, and he said something along the lines of, you know, they've managed to strengthen their roster. Yeah, it hasn't manifested in performances as yet, but the roster is stronger. And I'm thinking, if it hasn't manifested in performances, how is it?
Well,
it that
quite literally paper tigers?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is in no
you
way.
paid more for some flashier names.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and that's not a reflection on some of the name players that they've recruited, but it's if players cannot play to the best of their ability at a club, then there is something else that's wrong with the roster or the coaching that prevents them from performing at their best. Because you can go rattling off players that you've added to the squad to make the squad better. But if the squad isn't better, and they are a few weeks away from maybe securing their back-to-back wooden spoons. And we've been there as Eels supporters, and we can look back and go, you know what, that wasn't a great roster that we had. And you know what, the coaches didn't do a great job either in those back-to-back spoon seasons. But I mean, we can look back and we can be honest about that. I think the Tigers at some point have to be honest about there are things wrong within their organisation, and whatever level it's at, whether it's at administration, whether it's at coaching level, whether it's at the strength of the roster, whatever the case may be, unless they're honest and face it, then they're trying to pull the wool over supporters' eyes, and they're making themselves really, you have to say, the laughing stock of the NRL at this point. And the supporters don't deserve that. Fellas, we had planned that we were going to talk about the job that Andrew Webster was doing at the Warriors and whether he could perhaps be in line for Coach of the Year. We might push that to next week, especially given that they've got another big clash this weekend. So I think we've covered about everything that we possibly can at this stage across Paradise and in the NRL. So, Clint, thank you again for your outstanding work in the podcast. Same for you, John. Well done. Our thanks also to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan, and Parramatta. A reminder, you've got the 2GB continuous call team happening down at Para Leagues Club between 1 and 10 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, and they'll be covering the Eels game later in the evening till our next podcast, which is going to be probably our NRLW special podcast. It's Go You Mighty Eels.